As we go about our everyday lives, the land around us is ever present. Whether it is a place of someone's home, a vibrant forest, or a vineyard, the land gives and sustains life.
It sort of was like my safe space for a long time in my life, and it sort of felt like pristine and natural. As I grew older and grew up, I also began to realize that this land that I saw as so pristine and so untouched was actually extremely degraded, which was a little devastating to realize, but also got me interested in, well, what can we do to restore land?
Without proper care of the land, there's much to lose. Our natural landscapes have been degraded by unsustainable human activities. Conserving what's left of the land and restoring some of what has been lost is an important yet challenging task. It may feel like this is a huge undertaking, but change begins when we reflect on our relationships to land.
I grew up in the woods. I felt a real connection to the land, and part of that was just being able to walk wherever I wanted, to be able to plant whatever I wanted in different gardens, to just feel some kind of agency in that area. I didn't really realize how important that was to me and how important that was to my relationship with this area than when I moved away.
I come from Argentina, and back in my country, inequality is a big thing. And I have always been interested in social justice. And I think who owns the land and who doesn't own the land is a big thing.
I think conservation is such a big issue for me. My family's from Indonesia, and we're facing a lot of deforestation. It's really easy to be in research and feel like your work is doing something, when in actuality it's all very theoretical.
As an academic, I used to feel like I had very little control over the world around me, but that doesn't necessarily need to be true. And I hope that we can learn through this process together of this film, of seeing how that can be, how we can personally and more structurally bring about change.
We're a team of graduate students at Stanford who want to learn more about the land we're on. As ecology students, land has been a foundational part of our research around biodiversity, climate change, and conservation. Yet, our experiences always brought back questions of how land is managed and what barriers and opportunities exist for widespread participation in land stewardship. What diverse roles are people playing in stewarding land in the San Francisco Bay Area today?
Learning more about kind of the history of California, you learn about how the severing a lot of these relationships between people and the land, were directly correlated or directly led to a lot of the either mismanagement or environmental disasters that we're facing. It comes down to land and the people on it.
Even for me, I think when I think about land stewardship, it just feels like such a big word, and it feels like you can't do anything about it. At least in my own journey of learning about what it means to actually just know more about your lands. I guess for me, it feels like it's nice to know that you can kind of do something about it.
I have seen situations where bad decisions have been made, and I think that's what really got me into who owns the land, who manages the land, who is making the decisions. And I think any person should be compelled about asking these questions because they have direct impact, not only in the ecosystems, but also in the people who inhabit the land.
Have you ever thought about the land you live on? What is your relationship to it? Who owns it? Do you feel a relationship to nature on this land? Thinking about these questions, we realize there is a lot we do not know about our own land. This was our chance to reach out to local experts and learn from them.
I'm excited to see examples of restoration practices, of what it means to do management across diverse voices and very, a large variety of organizations, all who maybe have different end goals, and how you can still somehow get something that helps not just the land, but also yourself out of that, some positive example of how we can affect positive change in the world rather than just negative.
We set off on our journey across the San Francisco Bay Area, visiting 4 local experts who have their own meaningful relationships to land. We're excited to share their perspectives on how their land is managed and how people can make a difference. The first place we went to was Stanford's Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve, a place where we have spent many hours hiking, learning, and researching. This preserve sits on 1,193 acres of land owned by Stanford and has gone through multiple transitions of how the land was used. Now, it serves as a natural laboratory for scientists and students around conservation and education.
So I'm very excited about interviewing Jorge Ramos, who is the executive director of Jasper Ridge. I think he can offer a unique perspective in terms of how an educational institution such as Stanford can build the relationship between young people and the land. So I'm also excited on understanding how a place like Jasper Ridge can actually change the type of managing the land into a more focused on a stewardship-based program.
We have three main pillars, which is research, education, and stewardship. It's how do we follow those three pillars into the study of our ecosystems, into who does research here, what type of research they do, what type of education practices do we do, and what kind of philosophies do we do or we follow. So over the years, we've built a very inclusive environment of how can others see themselves at a field station, either as a scientist, as a docent, as a future land steward. A lot of changes that are going to be happening at Jasper Ridge this year and next 5 years are sort of mandates that are coming from the university. So like fuel reduction in our preserve. One of the things that we're doing differently this year is instead of doing clear cuts, we added shaded fuel breaks. So what we did, we made more ecologically based decisions. And one of the things that we did also, we immediately contacted the Mualim tribe. How do they want to be involved? What do they want to learn from this? What do we learn from them? And then we also have to consult with all of our neighbors. So we have the city of Woodside, the city of Portola Valley. As soon as we started building the piles, we already got contacted by neighbors and it's like, why are you building piles? What does that mean? Because a lot of people with the right reasons, some people are still afraid of fire. Some people are still, afraid of air pollution. So actually this week, today at 2, we're having our first communication meeting on how is Stanford going to communicate to all of the neighbors. We're going to explain the benefits of this management action. How are we involving research? How are we involving education? And so that's going to take time.
Next, we went up into the city to visit the Good Prospect Community Garden to learn more about managing land as green space in an urban setting. The community garden is a small plot of land owned by the city and managed by the San Francisco Recreation and Park Department. This once empty side of an unaccepted street was transformed into a community garden now used by residents.
I recently moved to San Francisco, and it's been a struggle and a learning experience to try and figure out my relationships with that land. And Jorge Romero, his work in advocating for and building green spaces in otherwise kind of forgotten and derelict parts of San Francisco, I think a really inspiring and maybe overlooked way to really bring nature and our understanding of like our ecological relationships into the city and rebuild those relationships.
About a year ago, I started a nonprofit called Greening Projects that focuses on creating as much green open space as possible, basically everywhere, but obviously starting in San Francisco and the Bay Area. So my relationship with green space is that it makes me feel more connected to the land, and even like some of my neighbors have like basically taken up all the plants and just put concrete because it's a lot easier. I think that's just not good for environment. It's not good for us as human beings. We need to have that connection with nature. And again, the initiative that we have here in San Francisco, we have a combined sewers that all the rain and the sewage gets combined into one system, and then it all has to be treated. And so then when we have these huge storms, it can be treated, and so a lot of it ends up in the ocean untreated. So the idea of just putting that rain back into the ground by having these green spaces is huge from, again, an environmental standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, from just a cost standpoint also. So the issue about parcel 36, so nobody exactly knew who it belonged to. It just kind of has been sitting there. I am on the side of the people that want to turn it into a greenway. If you look at the site, it's, I think, close to an acre. It gets sun the whole day. It really needs to be a green space because there isn't that much in the mission. However, business is getting involved and say, well, we need parking. And everybody needs parking. And there are a lot of places and a lot of merchants in the Mission District that do not have parking because they can't afford it. And so now it's going to people that can afford it. And so we're sacrificing green space just for parking. And I think that's where a perfect example where government has to get involved and say, okay, we're doing this. And maybe the community says, the entire neighborhood says, no, we want parking. Then we'll get them parking. But it hasn't even gotten to that point. It's just becoming a complete mess. It is important to me because this is where I live. This is where we have our home. Someday our house will probably become our daughter's house. It's kind of selfishly, I'm interested in making a safe, clean space for my daughter when we're gone, because she might live here in the city, and so that's important to me. And I do think that all of this is connected. It's difficult to just take something away and say, well, if we take this part away, we fix this, we'll fix this other problem. I think lack of housing, the levels of the amount of people that are unhoused, the cost of living, corruption that we're facing, and so on, and the lack of green space, all of it has to work for us to have a good working society, functioning society. I can't cover it all, so I chose green spaces.
For our next location, we traveled north of San Francisco to the Ring Mountain Preserve to learn more about how land can be managed by a larger nonprofit organization. The approximately 400-acre preserve was originally purchased by the Nature Conservancy in the 1980s and is now managed as public lands in Marin County, with the land still under a conservation easement with the Nature Conservancy.
I'm really looking forward to getting to talk to the Nature Conservancy because they sort of sit in a really unique position as a private nonprofit group managing large tracts of land in the US. And so I'm really curious as well to also hear about their broader vision on conservation and land management practices moving forward. But it'll be interesting to see what their goals are sort of working within the system, as opposed to some of the other people that we're interviewing who work in a less traditional framework of what it means to manage and approach land governance practices.
Today we are on the Ring Mountain Preserve. Biologically, it's extraordinarily significant. It is a site with serpentine soils. Plants and animals that live on them have specialized to cope with that chemistry. And that means that they're vulnerable. And it means that if you want to keep, like here on Ring Mountain, 7 rare plants, if you want to ensure they have a future, you need to preserve the place. I work for the Nature Conservancy. I have worked for the Nature Conservancy my whole career, which is, you ready for this? 47 years. I know, it's amazing, even to me. My relationship with life on the planet is basically religious. I know I depend on it. I love it. I feel that it embraces me as another living organism. And so, working in conservation it's like worship. When I started with the Nature Conservancy in 1976, what we thought, and frankly what most entities, private and public, thought one needed to protect land was to find a good place and put a fence around it. Boy, were we wrong. So landscape scale conservation became a strategy to address this new learning. And we started using conservation easements to protect lands that were in good shape in their current land use, to lock in those land uses so that the lands couldn't subsequently be broken up and used more intensively. So we now have 647,000 acres under easement in California, which is a lot. We have about 250,000 acres in lands that we currently hold and manage. And what has evolved in conservation, I think, across the conservation community is a collaborative approach And in the Nature Conservancy, applying science to find solutions that work for nature and for people. I think that it's critical that we connect people with the land. Because if they don't have an experience of it, if they don't realize it's there, and that it's a living, dynamic thing that can provide them with comfort and beauty and relaxation, that why in the world would they support it politically? Why in the world would they live in a way that reduces their impacts? So there are many organizations that do this, but where we have a project that there's a community that would benefit from that, we absolutely focus on it. On the Santa Clara River, which is in Ventura County, there's this lovely river that runs right through the valley. Nobody had any access to it. It was all private land. Part of the project is a public park-like facility on the river with access for school buses, with bilingual interpreters, with hikes in season, and with, frankly, just a place for kids to play in the water, which was so much a part of my childhood. And, you know, those opportunities are limited. And as I said, you know, it's not an ideal environment. There was a lot of industry in the area historically. There's restoration going on around that. But people live here, and this is where nature is. You have to deal with nature where nature is, and frankly, nature is everywhere. But when it's really rich and dynamic and biodiverse, that's where the Nature Conservancy wants to focus on it.
As for our final location, we drove up to Napa Valley to visit the Suskull House to learn more about Indigenous land and Indigenous people's perspective on land. The Suskull House is a 20-acre property owned by the Suskull Intertribal Council. It is a place of gathering and ceremony for Native and Indigenous people based on sustainable land and water use.
I grew up here in Napa County, actually on the west side, and met Charlie by volunteering at some of the actual Suskull intertribal powwows. I've known her for a couple of years. Thought she'd be a really fantastic voice to have. And I really wanted to learn what she has to say about stewardship. I'm just really excited to see what she has to say.
So my personal relationship to this land, and I think land is a funny thing. A Native American perspective, we see it more like earth, and then it's all connected. So it's not just this parcel here, but this parcel here of land is our organization's connection to the earth. We're here at Suskull House, and it's Suskull, S-U-S-K-O-L, and in honor of the Patwin people. And where we are at the eastern side, the eastern ridgeline of Angwin to the Sacramento River is Patwin territory. And Suskull was the village site at the southern part of Napa, a southern crossing right across the river. That village was right there on the river, one of the oldest continuously having places in North America. So Suskull is that village, that band. So Suskull's been in the forefront since its inception in 1972 to advocate for Native people, for Indigenous people. We're advocating now, working in coalition with tribes through the Americas, working around land stewardship and human rights for women and children and Indigenous people of the world. It was actually 1986 when I started getting connected to my Indigenous roots. We were doing a bunch of work around the state trying to help people in the early stages of recovery from the genocides that occurred here in California. And the collective consensus that came up after about 3 years of going to gatherings was that tribal people of California need a safe place to do ceremony. And then to do ceremony, that got demonized, you know, our ceremony, our connection to the earth, our prayers, that somehow that we were savages and doing demon worship, which I think is actually the opposite. So it was very high risk, but that's why we purchased this land in order to have a safe place for Native Americans to gather. And in 1998, that was quite revolutionary because mostly the tribes were granted land from the government. They were allowed to keep it. So that was like a step out of the box, so to speak. And that set kind of a wake-up call through the state. You know, wow, those guys just bought the land up there. Well, we could buy the land too. And then a lot of the tribes that had the money started repurchasing their traditional land up in Lake County and down in San Diego. Stewardship is about relationships, and it's relationship to the earth again, rather than the word land, because land sort of has that consumptive sound to it. So we say the earth is our mother, the living earth. And I think a lot of the ways that anybody could start to build relationship is with how you talk about it. So we say the tree people, the winged ones, the four-leggeds, the rock people. We really call them people. And so I think the really important thing is the vocabulary, the words that you use, just like we said about that consumptive or extractive, to be more, no, we're tending, we're caretaking, we're helping to protect.
For me, I'm super excited that stewardship is going to be like inviting more people to make decisions that will help us build a better future. Just this year, we created 2 new student-focused programs that actually are directly involved into stewardship. I'm always surprised that no one sees education as a climate solution. And that's especially at a field station where, we have the opportunity to show all of these conversations about climate change and carbon. It's always a continuing passing on of knowledge.
At least here in the neighborhood, but throughout the city, there seems to be this newfound desire to create more green space or to beautify areas and bring more nature. And I think it's great. And I think it's great that young people are doing it now because you guys are going to continue on with this. And so it makes me feel very, very positive about the future that's happening.
So I hope that more people will connect with nature. And I hope they'll care about it. And I hope they'll work for it because nature needs you. But you know what? You need nature. You need it for your water. You need it for your food. You need it for your mental health. And it doesn't have to be going on a hike or going to a wild area. It means getting out and paying attention, looking closely, and open yourself up to that feeling of awe and beauty because it's there. It's there in the smallest things. And that spirit that you experience is the same one that animates you. You make that connection, you don't have any trouble being motivated.
There are solutions, and it will take everybody on this earth at this time acting. And my grandchildren, who are like 15 and 12, they're like ready for it. And then people think, well, if you can do it there, we can do it here. Hopefully, that's the thought. Just it'll inspire other people to do their own dream.
Getting to visit these lands and talk to the people who have a deep relationship with land has been pretty eye-opening to us. We got back together on Zoom to share our reflections.
One of the things that had drawn me to the project was, as an academic, it's hard to feel like your work is having an immediate impact on the world around you, especially when it comes to conservation and land management. But the course of this project has really opened my eyes to just how far what may feel like little things can get you. For example, the greening project that Jorge is running in San Francisco is having meaningful impact on many people's lives, even if it is less than an acre of land in the middle of the city. Jasper Ridge, seeing how outreach and just getting people in green spaces can make a huge difference. And so it's been really positive for me to see how these small interventions can really add up to a meaningful change.
I led the interviews with Charlie Toledo and Jorge Romero Lozano. Jorge Romero Lozano talked a lot about connections that are important to make projects happen and the real challenges. Even do something so small as to turn a small forgotten lot into a park. And Charlie talked a lot about how our relationships to each other, to our neighbors, to the earth, and to all the other living relatives are so important for this work. And really, to me, the kind of through line through all this is really just that relationships are important.
One of the biggest things is that as an immigrant, I didn't know about a lot of the organizations in California that are concerned about the uses of land and land stewardship, the conservation of lands. One of the things that really resonated with me is Lynn's vision. If you are in deep contact with what surrounds you, then you start deeply caring about it, and then that will drive you to take action. And for example, join an organization, or like at least start speaking about these topics with colleagues or friends or people that surround you.
I don't think I've ever spoken to any of you guys about this topic before. And so it was kind of cool also learning more about what y'all thought about it and what your connection with land is. So I remember that in the beginning of this project, land stewardship and conservation felt like big themes that individuals couldn't really make an impact on. But I'm realizing that having a connection to your land can take on many different forms. It's a process that is like very deeply intertwined with just your own personal connection to nature, or it could be related to building community or protecting and just conserving ecosystems around you. I started gardening, and then I started noticing, I was just more attentive to my surroundings. I realized like there was this Friends of the Urban Forest project that happens in like SF, where they try to plant a tree in like sidewalks all throughout like neighborhoods. And I thought that was really cool.
I think that people do have this kind of innate skill and kind of desire to form relationships with each other and with the things around them. Thinking about how important that is, if we can get that right and move in that direction, then we're going to go a long ways and I think making the earth a better place for each other and for everything that lives here.
I guess as last thoughts, this project reinforced for me that structural change is necessary to make the changes needed to address climate change from a conservation stewardship perspective. But nevertheless, small personal actions can still do good. And so there's place in the world for both.